The crystal vase hit the marble floor before anyone could stop it. "Get out," the boy whispered. Not screamed, whispered. Somehow that was worse. Nanny number 46 stood frozen in the doorway of the playroom, glass glittering around her shoes like fallen stars, and for the first time in 3 days on the job, she looked genuinely afraid of a 4-year-old. Downstairs, a man who controlled 12,000 employees and a fortune most people couldn't picture without a calculator sat at his desk with his head in his hands, because the one person on earth he could not control was sleeping 2 floors above him. What none of them knew yet, not the nanny already dialing for her ride, not the desperate father, not even the silent boy still standing in a pile of broken glass, was that the woman who would finally reach that child wasn't coming from an agency at all. She was coming from 4,000 miles away, carrying nothing but a psychology degree, a dead father's memory, and a promise she didn't know yet that she'd made. Before we go further, take a moment to subscribe, like this video, and tell me where you're watching from. It truly means a lot to see how far these stories connect with people around the world. Now let's go back to where it all began. Daniel Ashworth built Ashworth Dynamics from a garage in Austin into a $500 billion empire in 17 years. Forbes called him the coldest man in tech. Business Insider ran a headline that read, "Ashworth doesn't negotiate, he wins." Board members who'd known him for a decade said they'd never once seen him raise his voice, because he never needed to. A quiet word from Daniel Ashworth could end a career. 2 years ago, none of that mattered anymore. 2 years ago, his wife Claire was diagnosed with an aggressive form of pancreatic cancer on a Tuesday in March, and by the following October, she was gone. Daniel didn't cry at the funeral. People whispered about that for months. The Ice King, they called him, cold even in grief. What they didn't see was the man who sat in his car in the parking garage of the hospital for 4 hours after she died, unable to make his hands work the ignition. What they also didn't see was his son. Wesley Ashworth had been the loudest, happiest 3-year-old in 3 time zones. He used to run through the halls of their Denver estate yelling for his mother every single morning, his laugh echoing off ceilings that cost more than most houses. Then Claire got sick. And slowly, month by month, the boy watching her fade seemed to fade right alongside her. The day she died, Wesley stopped talking. Not gradually, completely. One day he had words, and the next, he simply didn't use them anymore. Child psychologists who'd examined him, the 3 who lasted long enough to run an evaluation, used terms like trauma-induced selective mutism and complicated childhood grief. But understanding the diagnosis and reaching the child turned out to be 2 very different battles. 46 caregivers in 18 months. That was the number by the time our story really begins. 46 trained, credentialed, highly paid professionals were defeated one after another by a boy who never raised his voice, never threw a real tantrum, and never said a single word. He simply made himself impossible to reach, hiding, breaking things quietly, staring through people like they were glass, until every last one of them gave up and walked out the door. Do you think a broken little boy could really scare off nearly 50 grown professionals without saying a word? Drop a comment below. I want to know what you think is really going on in that house. Daniel's assistant, a sharp, endlessly patient woman named Priya, had stopped even pretending to be optimistic when she called the agency's now Ashworth estate, calling about coverage for, was usually as far as she got before someone on the other end sighed and said, "We can't send anyone else, Priya." "I'm sorry." 3 agencies in Denver had quietly blacklisted the family. A 4th had sent a formal letter citing concerns for employee well-being. Daniel read that letter twice, standing alone in his study at 11 at night, and felt something in his chest crack a little further. He loved his son so much it terrified him, and he had absolutely no idea how to reach him. That night, his mother, Eleanor Ashworth, called. "Dinner Sunday," she said, in the tone that had ended arguments with 3 husbands and 1 difficult son. "I found someone." "Don't argue with me, Daniel." "Mother, we've tried. I know what you've tried. This is different. Sunday, 6 o'clock. He didn't have the energy left to argue with anyone anymore, so he simply said, "Fine," and hung up, staring at his phone like it had betrayed him. Upstairs, in a room decorated with dinosaurs he no longer looked at, Wesley Ashworth lay in the dark, clutching a photograph of his mother that had gone soft and worn at the edges from being held too many times, and cried without making a single sound, because somewhere in the last 18 months he had learned that even his own tears were safer when silent. He had no idea that in 5 days someone was finally going to hear him anyway, 4,000 miles away, or really just across the same city, in a modest 2-bedroom apartment near the University of Denver. Dr. Maya Coleman was having the worst week of her professional life. Rejection number 31 had arrived that morning. "We've decided to move forward with a candidate whose background more closely aligns with our current client base." Maya read it twice, deleted it, and resisted the powerful urge to throw her laptop across the room, mostly because the laptop was the only thing standing between her and total unemployment. She was 29 years old. She held a doctorate in clinical child psychology from a respected program in Chicago, had published 2 peer-reviewed papers on trauma-informed care, and had spent 3 years working with grieving children in underserved communities before her position was cut in a round of budget layoffs. She was, by any honest measure, exceptional at her job. None of that seemed to matter once people saw her name on a resume and then saw her face in a video interview. Her roommate, Renee, a nurse who worked brutal 12-hour shifts and somehow still had the energy to worry about everybody else's life more than her own, poked her head into the room holding 2 mugs of tea. "Another one?" she asked. 31, Maya said. Same polite nothing, different letterhead. "Denver's loss," Renee said, sitting cross-legged on the bed. "You know that. Denver doesn't know that. Denver keeps hiring the same 3 people who all went to the same school, and look the same, and sound the same." Maya rubbed her eyes. "My student loan people don't care about implicit bias, Renee. They just want their money. How long until—" "2 months, Maya said quietly. 2 months of savings left before I'm looking at moving back with my mother in Atlanta, and she will never, ever let me hear the end of it." Renee winced sympathetically and picked up her phone to scroll, while Maya stewed, and then suddenly went very still. "Okay, weird," Renee said. "My old professor just posted in the alumni group. Someone's looking for a child psychologist. Emergency, high-profile family, live-in position." She scrolled further, and her eyebrows shot up. "Maya, the pay on this is insane." "How insane?" $18,000 a month, plus full housing, plus benefits." Maya nearly spilled her tea. "That's not a typo? It says the family has gone through 46 caregivers in 18 months. Maya's professional instincts kicked in immediately, cutting straight through the shock of the number. 46. That's not normal turnover, Renee. That's either a severely disturbed situation or catastrophic mismanagement, possibly both. It says the child is 4 and hasn't spoken since his mother passed. Something in Maya's chest tightened in a way she recognized instantly. She knew that particular silence intimately. She had lived inside it once, a long time ago, in a house in Atlanta that had gone quiet the year she turned 7. "Trauma-induced mutism," she murmured. "Classic grief presentation in young children, especially when caregivers try to force speech instead of building safety first. Whoever's been handling this has probably been doing it exactly backward. So apply. They've rejected 46 qualified people. What makes you think they'd take me?" "Because those 46 people clearly didn't understand what they were doing," Renee said simply. "And you do. Also, no offense, you're currently unemployed and mildly desperate." "Extremely desperate," Maya corrected, and found herself almost smiling for the first time in days. She looked up the family name once Renee found it. Ashworth. Her stomach dropped slightly. Renee Ashworth, as in Ashworth Dynamics. As in the fifth richest man in the country, Ashworth. That's the one. Maya sat back, absorbing it. Everyone in the country had seen Daniel Ashworth's face, stone-faced on the cover of a business magazine, unreadable in a congressional hearing about tech regulation, silent and severe in every photograph she could ever remember seeing of him. She also remembered, vaguely, headlines about his wife's death 2 years back. A beautiful, well-loved woman, gone too young, a grieving father, a traumatized little boy, a revolving door of strangers who kept trying and failing to fix something that couldn't be fixed with expertise alone. "I'm applying," Maya said suddenly, surprising herself with how certain it sounded coming out of her mouth. "Really? That boy doesn't need another nanny, Renee. He needs somebody who's actually been where he is." She was already opening her laptop. "And I happen to be exactly that kind of somebody. What about the family?" "Old money, conservative, probably has never met anybody who looks like you in their entire life." Maya met her friend's eyes steadily. "Then that's their limitation, not mine. If they're posting in a university alumni group after burning through 46 professionals, they're desperate enough to look past whatever prejudice they're carrying. Maybe. There's my brave friend." "Not brave," Maya said, hitting send on her application before she could talk herself out of it. "Broke. But I'll take brave if it's on offer." The response came back in under 10 minutes. An interview. 2 days from now, 10 in the morning, at the Ashworth estate. Maya stared at her phone, heart hammering somewhere near her throat. 2 days to prepare to walk into the home of one of the most powerful families in the country and convince them she was exactly what a broken 4-year-old needed when 46 people with better resumes and, she suspected, significantly less melanin had already failed. "No pressure at all. I need to borrow your good blazer," she told Renee. "Already getting it," Renee said, already halfway out the door. The gates to the Ashworth estate were the kind of tall that made a statement on purpose. Maya stood outside them at 9:55, adjusting Renee's blazer for the 4th time, a little snug across her shoulders, but it would have to do, and staring up a driveway that curved out of sight into a mansion built entirely of glass, stone, and old money. Her phone buzzed. A text from her mother in Atlanta. "Did you eat this morning? Smile at people. It makes a good impression." "It's a job interview, Mama, not a pageant," Maya typed back, smiling despite herself, and pressed the intercom button before her mother could reply again. "Dr. Coleman, for the 10 o'clock appointment." The gates swung open without a sound, because of course they did. Rich people's gates didn't creak. A butler met her at the door, older, silver-haired, dignified, with kind eyes that flickered with the smallest note of surprise before smoothing back into professional warmth. "Dr. Coleman, welcome. I'm Nathaniel. Please follow me." The inside of the house was somehow even more intimidating than the outside. Marble floors that reflected light like still water, art on the walls that probably cost more than her entire education, and an overwhelming, aching silence, as though the whole house were holding its breath and had been for 2 years. Nathaniel led her down a hallway lined with family portraits, and Maya noticed something immediately. None of them were recent. Nothing in the last 2 years. It was as if the family's visual history had simply stopped the moment Claire Ashworth died. "Mrs. Ashworth is waiting in the drawing room," Nathaniel said gently, and something in the way he said it made Maya think he was quietly rooting for her. Eleanor Ashworth sat on a cream-colored sofa, elegant in her 60s, a woman who had clearly spent decades learning exactly how to hold a room without raising her voice. Beside her sat a younger woman in her early 30s, sharply dressed, arms crossed, wearing an expression that suggested she'd already made up her mind about this meeting before it started. "Dr. Coleman," Eleanor said, "please, sit. This is my daughter, Victoria." "Mrs. Pierce," Maya said, using the married name she'd found in her research. "It's nice to meet you." Victoria's smile was thin as paper. "How interesting. Professor Alvarez sent you?" "He recommended me, yes. And you have experience with difficult children." The way Victoria said difficult made it clear she meant something entirely different. "I have experience with traumatized children," Maya said evenly. "There's a meaningful difference. Difficult implies a behavior problem. Trauma implies pain. They require completely different approaches. Eleanor's eyebrow lifted, just slightly, with interest. You've researched Wesley's situation. I've researched what's publicly available. A 4-year-old boy who lost his mother 18 months ago and hasn't spoken since. Multiple caregivers were rejected. That presentation is consistent with complicated grief and a severe attachment disruption. 46 caregivers, Victoria cut in. 46 trained professionals couldn't reach him. What makes you think you're different? Maya held her gaze without flinching. Because from what I understand, all 46 were trying to be nannies. I'm not applying to be a nanny, Mrs. Pierce. I'm a clinical child psychologist who specializes in grief and trauma in young children. That's a fundamentally different skill set. You're very young for someone so confident. I'm 29, with a doctorate and 3 years of direct clinical experience with grieving children. My age doesn't change my qualifications. She paused and decided to meet the unspoken question head-on, rather than let it hang in the room uninvited. And I suspect that isn't really your concern. The silence that followed had teeth in it. You think a black woman with an American accent is going to reach a child who's already rejected 46 people who looked far more familiar to him, Maya said quietly. It wasn't a question. Eleanor studied her for a long moment, and then, unexpectedly, she smiled. A real one, small and surprised. Tell me about your father, Dr. Coleman. The question caught Maya off guard. My father. You mentioned in your application that you experienced early parental loss. I'd like to hear about it, if you're willing. Maya took a slow breath. My father died of lung cancer when I was 6. I remember being furious more than sad at first. Furious that everyone kept telling me he was in a better place, as if any place could possibly be better than with me. I stopped talking for almost 3 months. Eleanor leaned forward, genuinely listening now, and even Victoria had gone quiet. What made you start again? My grandmother, Maya said. She never tried to make me talk, never told me to be strong or that everything would be fine. Well, she just sat with me every single day and told me stories about my father. Funny ones, sad ones, real ones, until eventually I had a story of my own to tell back. Maya's voice steadied. Wesley doesn't need someone to fix him, Mrs. Ashworth. He needs someone willing to sit in the silence with him until he decides it's safe to fill it. 46 people tried to rush him through his grief. I'm not interested in rushing anyone. The silence that followed felt different this time. Warmer. The position is live-in, Eleanor said finally. You'd have your own quarters, though your availability would need to be nearly constant. My son works long hours, and Wesley needs consistency above almost everything else. I understand. The salary is $18,000 monthly, with housing, meals, and full health care provided. You would report to me and to my son directly. He has final say in all matters concerning Wesley. Maya kept her expression steady, though internally her student loan balance was doing cartwheels. Mother, Victoria interrupted sharply, we should really discuss this further before committing to anything. This is highly irregular. This family has a certain reputation to think about. This family, Eleanor said, without raising her voice at all, has a 4-year-old boy who hasn't smiled in 18 months to think about. That takes precedence over reputation, Victoria. It always has. Victoria's jaw tightened, but she said nothing further. Eleanor turned back to Maya. Can you start Monday? Maya's heart was pounding so hard she was certain the whole room could hear it. Yes. Then welcome to the Ashworth household, Dr. Coleman. Don't disappoint us. I won't. See that you don't, Eleanor said, not unkindly. Wesley has already been disappointed enough for one lifetime. As Nathaniel walked her out, Maya could hear Victoria's voice rising sharply behind the closed drawing room door, and she couldn't quite make out the words, only the temperature of them, cold, urgent, and afraid. Outside, the gates closing behind her, Maya called Renee before she'd even reached the sidewalk. I got it, she said, breathless. Renee, I actually got it. Renee screamed so loudly Maya had to hold the phone away from her ear. We are absolutely celebrating tonight. I start Monday. 5 days. 5 days to prepare to meet Daniel Ashworth in person, Renee said slyly. I've seen the man's photos, Maya. He's also a grieving widower, and about to be my employer, Renee. Doesn't make him less handsome. Maya rolled her eyes, laughing despite herself as she walked toward the bus stop, unable to fully suppress the small, stunned smile spreading across her face. She'd actually done it. Now all she had to do was succeed, where 46 far more conventional candidates had already failed. No pressure at all. She had no way of knowing yet that somewhere behind those closing gates, a silent 4-year-old boy was about to meet the 50th stranger to walk through his door, and that this time, unlike all the others, she had absolutely no intention of leaving. Monday arrived heavy with the weight of everything riding on it. Maya stood outside the Ashworth estate with 2 suitcases and a small carved wooden elephant her grandmother had given her years ago. For strength, her grandmother used to say. Elephants never forget where they come from. Nathaniel greeted her warmly at the door. Welcome back, Dr. Coleman. Let me show you to your quarters first. Mr. Ashworth would like to meet with you before you see Wesley. Her stomach flipped immediately. She had researched Daniel Ashworth extensively over the weekend. Every profile, every interview, every carefully controlled public appearance, but research and reality, she was about to learn, were 2 very different things. His study was all dark wood, leather, and towering bookshelves, and the man standing in the center of it looked nothing like his photographs. Photographs hadn't prepared her for the sheer physical presence of him. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a charcoal suit that fit like a second skin. His face was sharp-edged and striking, carved from something that looked cold at first glance. But his eyes told an entirely different story. They were exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. The eyes of a man who had been holding on far too tightly for far too long and was quietly, privately terrified of what would happen the moment he finally let go. Dr. Coleman, he said, his voice deep and carefully controlled. Thank you for coming. Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Ashworth. He gestured to a chair, but remained standing himself, clearly more comfortable holding a position of authority than surrendering it, even for a moment. I'll be direct with you. I don't believe you'll succeed where 46 others failed. Maya didn't flinch. That's fair. I don't need you to believe it yet. Something flickered behind his eyes. Surprise, maybe, that she hadn't tried to reassure him. The others all promised results within weeks. Then the others were lying to you, or to themselves, Maya said simply. Grief doesn't work on anyone's timeline but its own, Mr. Ashworth, least of all a 4-year-old's. I'm not here to fix your son in 30 days. I'm here to be a safe, steady presence until he decides on his own that it's safe to let one back in. That could take a month. It could take a year. Daniel studied her for a long, silent moment. My mother said you told her about your father. I did. Why? Because your son doesn't need someone who's read about grief in a textbook, Mr. Ashworth. He needs someone who's actually lived on the other side of it and made it through. I wanted your family to know which kind of psychologist you were hiring. For the first time since she'd walked into the room, something in his shoulders loosened, almost imperceptibly. Wesley hasn't spoken in 18 months. Not one word. Not to me, not to my mother, not to a single specialist we've brought in. I know. Every single expert we've consulted has a different theory and a different plan, and none of them have worked. With respect, sir, Maya said carefully, I suspect the problem isn't a lack of expertise. I suspect it's that every single one of those experts walked in already trying to make him talk, instead of first making him feel safe enough for talking to become possible. Those are very different goals, and they require very different approaches. Daniel was quiet for a long moment, turning that over. And if you're wrong, then I'll be caregiver number 47, and you'll go back to the agencies with one more name to add to the list, Maya said. But I don't intend to be wrong, Mr. Ashworth. I intend to still be here long after this conversation is a distant memory to both of us. Something that might, in a different lifetime, have been the beginning of a smile crossed his face and vanished almost as quickly as it appeared. We'll see, Dr. Coleman. Yes, Maya said. We will. If you've ever lost someone and had to find your voice again, or watched someone you love go quiet with grief, I want you to know, I see you. Give this video a like if this story is already hitting somewhere personal. Nathaniel led her upstairs to the 3rd floor, where the air itself seemed to change. Heavier, more careful, the way houses feel when everyone inside them is walking on eggshells they've stopped even noticing. Wesley's door was closed. Toy trucks and picture books were scattered outside it in the hallway, as though someone had tried, weeks ago, to leave a trail of small offerings that were never picked up. "He locks himself in sometimes," Nathaniel said quietly. "We've had to remove the lock twice. He's very resourceful for someone so small." Maya crouched down outside the door instead of knocking, lowering herself so that if the boy was watching through the crack beneath it, she wouldn't loom over him the way, she guessed, 46 exhausted, hurried adults probably had before her. "Hi, Wesley," she said softly to the door, to the silence, to whoever might be listening on the other side. "My name is Maya. I'm not going to ask you to talk to me today. I'm not even going to ask you to open the door. I'm just going to sit right here for a little while, if that's okay with you." Nothing. No sound. No movement. She sat anyway, back against the wall opposite his door, and pulled a battered paperback from her bag, an old favorite of hers, about a lonely dragon who couldn't remember how to breathe fire, and began reading aloud, quietly, to no one in particular. 10 minutes passed, then 20. She was on the 4th page when she heard it, the smallest scrape of movement from behind the door, the faintest shift of weight settling near the gap at the bottom. He was listening. She didn't stop reading. She didn't acknowledge it, didn't call out to him, didn't do anything that might spook him back into total stillness. She simply kept going, turning pages, letting her voice fill the hallway like it was the most natural thing in the world. When she finally stood to leave, 40 minutes later, joints stiff from the floor, she said only, "I'll be back tomorrow, same time, if that's all right." Then she left the book, closed but visible, right outside his door, and walked away without looking back. Downstairs, Victoria was waiting near the staircase, arms crossed, watching her descend, with an expression Maya couldn't quite read. "You sat on the floor and read to a closed door for 40 minutes, Victoria said, not quite a question. "I did. That's your professional strategy?" "My professional strategy is patience, Mrs. Pierce," Maya said evenly, "something I understand this house hasn't had a great deal of lately." Victoria's eyes narrowed, but there was something underneath the sharpness, something that looked almost like fear. "You don't know this family, Dr. Coleman. You don't know what's really at stake here." "Then perhaps you should tell me." Victoria's jaw tightened, and for just a moment Maya saw something flicker across her face, worry that had nothing at all to do with a 4-year-old's silence. "There's a board meeting in 3 weeks, Victoria said finally, carefully. "My brother hasn't been himself since Claire died. The board is concerned about his judgment, about his focus. And you're concerned about something else." "I'm concerned about protecting this family," Victoria snapped, and turned sharply on her heel, leaving Maya standing alone in the marble hallway with a distinct, uneasy feeling that there was a great deal more going on inside this house than one grieving little boy. "Something tells me Victoria isn't just worried about her nephew. What do you think she's really hiding? Let me know in the comments. I love reading your theories." The book was gone from outside Wesley's door the next morning. Maya noticed it the second she came up the stairs and had to stop herself from smiling too visibly in case Nathaniel was watching. Small victory. Quiet, unspoken, but real. She came back that afternoon and sat in the same spot, reading the next chapter of the Dragon book out loud, and this time, when she glanced beneath the gap at the bottom of the door, she saw the faint shadow of 2 small feet, planted just on the other side. He wasn't hiding from her anymore. He was listening on purpose. Days passed this way. She never pushed, never asked him to open the door, never mentioned his mother or his silence or any of the 800 clinical terms she could have used to describe his condition. She simply showed up, same time every day, and read. On day 6, she arrived to find the door open 6 careful inches. Not fully, but enough. She didn't rush it. She sat exactly where she always sat, opened the book to exactly where they'd left off, and kept reading as though nothing at all had changed, even though her heart was hammering with something close to triumph. By day 9, Wesley was sitting cross-legged just inside the doorway, close enough that she could see him now, small, solemn, dark-haired like his father, with enormous brown eyes that watched her with a wariness that broke her heart a little every single time she saw it. He never spoke, he never smiled, but he was there, and he was listening, and for a boy who had spent 18 months making himself invisible, that was enormous. It was on day 12 that everything nearly fell apart. Maya arrived for their afternoon session to find Victoria already in Wesley's room, crouched in front of him, speaking in the too bright, too loud voice adults sometimes use with small children they don't actually know how to talk to. "Wesley, sweetheart, Aunt Vicky needs you to use your words, okay? Just one word. Can you say hi to Aunt Vicky?" Wesley had folded into himself completely, knees drawn to his chest, staring at the floor with an intensity that told Maya exactly how far backward this had just knocked him. "Mrs. Pierce," Maya said carefully from the doorway, "may I speak with you for a moment?" Out in the hallway, Victoria rounded on her immediately. "I was trying to help. I understand that. But pushing him to speak right now undoes weeks of work. He needs to know that no one in this room is waiting for him to perform. The moment he feels that pressure again, he'll retreat completely, and we may lose ground it took us nearly 2 weeks to build. He's my nephew. I'm allowed to." "You're allowed to love him," Maya said gently but firmly. "I'm only asking you to love him on his terms right now, not yours. It's the only way any of us reach him." Victoria's eyes glistened suddenly, unexpectedly, and for the first time since Maya had met her, the sharp, guarded woman looked simply exhausted and afraid. "I lost my brother the same day I lost my sister-in-law," she said quietly. "Daniel used to call me every single week. Now I'm lucky if I see him twice a month. And Wesley. Wesley used to run to me at the door. Now he looks straight through me like I'm a stranger." Her voice cracked. "I don't know how to get any of them back, Dr. Coleman, and it terrifies me." For the first time, Maya saw the person underneath the polished hostility, and something in her softened. "Then let me help you get them back the right way," she said. "It just has to be slower than you want it to be." Victoria nodded, wiping her eyes quickly, composure snapping back into place like a mask. "The board meeting is in 9 days, she said abruptly, almost as if the words had escaped before she could stop them. "You mentioned that before. Why does it matter so much?" Victoria hesitated, glancing down the hallway as though checking for anyone listening. "There are people on that board who would very much like to see my brother declared unfit to continue running this company," she said quietly. "And a father who can't get his own son to speak to him doesn't exactly help his case." Maya felt a small, cold shift in her stomach. "Are you telling me there are people who want Wesley's condition made public? To use against your brother?" Victoria's silence was answer enough. Corporate boardrooms and grieving 4-year-olds shouldn't belong in the same sentence, but they're about to collide. Stick with me, because this story is only getting started. That evening, Maya found Daniel alone in his study, exactly where she'd found him on her first day, as though he never truly left the room, only paused inside it. "Your sister told me about the board," she said, without preamble. Daniel's expression closed instantly, the way she'd already learned it did whenever the conversation drifted anywhere near his company. "That's not your concern, Dr. Coleman. It became my concern the moment someone tried to use my patient's condition as ammunition in a corporate power struggle," Maya said evenly. He looked up sharply at that, something raw flashing across his face before he could smooth it away. "Is that what she told you?" "She told me enough. I'd like to hear the rest from you, if you're willing." Daniel was quiet for a long moment, staring down at his desk, at a framed photograph Maya hadn't noticed before. Claire, laughing, sunlight caught in her hair, a toddler Wesley perched on her hip mid-giggle. "There are 3 board members," he said finally, voice low, "who've been circling since Claire got sick. They think grief has made me a liability. They've been quietly building a case that I'm unfit to continue as CEO. Erratic decision-making, missed appearances, a son who won't speak. If they get enough votes at the annual meeting, they can force a leadership change. And if that happens, then I lose the company my father built, and I spent 17 years growing, and Wesley loses the only home he's ever known, right when he's finally starting to feel safe in it. His jaw tightened. I've spent 2 years trying to keep both of those things from happening at the same time, Dr. Coleman, and some days I'm not sure I'm succeeding at either. Maya studied him, really studied him, past the cold reputation and the tailored suit and the carefully controlled voice, and saw, for the first time, simply a father, terrified and drowning and doing his absolute best with none of the right tools. Then let's start with the thing you can actually control, she said quietly. Your son isn't a liability, Mr. Ashworth. He's a grieving little boy who needs his father to show up, not perform strength for a boardroom. Everything else, we figure out as it comes. Something in Daniel's face shifted, not resolved, not fixed, but softened, just slightly, at the edges. How do I show up for someone who won't even look at me? He asked, and for the first time, his voice cracked with something dangerously close to real vulnerability. You start by getting on the floor, Maya said simply. Not talking, not asking anything of him, just sitting where he is, at his level, for as long as it takes. 3 days later, Daniel Ashworth sat cross-legged on his son's bedroom floor for the first time in longer than either of them could remember, saying nothing, simply building an absurdly tall tower of wooden blocks while Wesley watched from a careful distance. He came back the next day. And the next. On the 7th evening, Wesley shuffled closer, closer than he'd come to his father in over a year, and silently added one small block to the top of the tower his father had built. Daniel had to look away for a moment so his son wouldn't see him blink back tears. It was 2 weeks later, a Tuesday evening, unremarkable in every way except that it would change everything, when Maya sat with Wesley in the reading nook by the window, midway through a story about a lighthouse keeper's daughter, and the boy who hadn't spoken in 18 months suddenly whispered, so quietly she almost missed it entirely, "Does the lighthouse ever go dark?" Maya froze completely, every clinical instinct in her body screaming at her not to react too big, not to cry, and not to do anything that might make him retreat back into the silence he'd only just tentatively stepped out of. Sometimes, she said, as calmly and steadily as she could manage, her heart absolutely soaring. But somebody always comes to light it again. Wesley considered this with the enormous seriousness only a 4-year-old can bring to a question, and then said, softer still, "My mommy was my lighthouse." "I know, sweetheart," Maya said gently, throat tight. "And it's okay to miss her out loud now. You don't have to keep it a secret anymore." Wesley looked up at her, really looked at her, for the very first time, and something in his small face cracked open. 18 months of silence finally finding a place to go. "I miss her every day," he whispered, and then he cried, really cried, loudly and messily and completely, for the first time since his mother died, and Maya simply held him and let him. I don't know about you, but I had to pause writing this part just to catch my breath. If a grieving child finding their voice again moves you the way it moved me, tell me in the comments, has a small moment like this ever changed your whole outlook? News that Wesley had spoken traveled through the house like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Eleanor wept openly at dinner. Nathaniel, normally so composed, had to excuse himself briefly to the kitchen. Even Victoria, when she heard, called Maya directly just to say, voice thick, "Thank you, truly." But Daniel's relief was shadowed almost immediately by something else. 3 days after Wesley's first words, one of the board members orchestrating the push against Daniel, a slick, ambitious man named Gregory Salas, who had been angling for the CEO position for years, leaked a story to a business journalist. The headline ran the next morning, "Ashworth's son diagnosed with severe developmental disorder. Sources question CEO's capacity to lead." It was cruel. It was misleading, and worst of all, someone inside the house had clearly fed Salas private information. Daniel was incandescent with a rage Maya hadn't seen from him before. Quiet, controlled fury that was somehow more frightening than shouting would have been. "Someone in this house talked to him," he said, pacing his study. Someone Wesley trusted enough to be around him talked to that man. It was Wesley, oddly enough, who gave them their first real clue. Maya had started, weeks earlier, giving him a sketchbook to draw in during their sessions, a gentle way of letting him express things he still wasn't always ready to say out loud. Flipping through it one afternoon, helping him choose a page, she stopped cold on a drawing from the week before. It showed two stick figures at a desk. One was unmistakably meant to be his father. The other was an unfamiliar man in a suit, and beside him, Wesley had drawn something small and rectangular with a tiny antenna, a recorder, or possibly a phone. "Wesley," Maya said carefully, keeping her voice light, "who's this man in your drawing?" Wesley considered the page seriously. "Daddy's angry meeting man. He comes when Daddy's not home. He talks to Nurse Denise a lot." Maya's blood ran cold. Nurse Denise was the private medical aide who visited twice weekly to monitor Wesley's pediatric wellness checks, someone with direct, privileged access to the boy's medical history. She brought the sketchbook straight to Daniel that evening. He stared at the drawing for a long time, jaw working, and then said quietly, "Denise was hired through an agency Gregory Salas's wife happens to sit on the board of." He looked up at Maya, something cold and clear settling behind his eyes. "I think we just found our leak. A 4-year-old's crayon drawing just cracked open a corporate conspiracy. I promise you, this twist is only the beginning. Stay with me." What followed was not loud or dramatic in the way movies make corporate betrayals look. It was quiet, careful, and devastating in its precision, which, Maya was beginning to understand, was simply how Daniel Ashworth operated when he decided to fight for something that mattered. He didn't confront Denise directly. Instead, he had his legal team quietly review her contract, her communications logs, and her financial records with full authorization, since she was, after all, an employee with signed confidentiality agreements now potentially in serious breach. Within 4 days, they had what they needed, a paper trail of payments from a shell consulting firm traced directly back to Gregory Salas, along with text messages in which Denise had shared confidential details about Wesley's medical evaluations and Daniel's private conversations with his therapist. It was, in the plainest possible terms, corporate espionage dressed up as caregiving, a betrayal so calculated it made Maya's skin crawl every time she thought about how close that woman had gotten to a grieving little boy simply to further a hostile takeover. Daniel called an emergency session with the full board, 2 days ahead of the scheduled meeting, and laid out the evidence without raising his voice once. Salas, cornered and exposed in front of his own colleagues, tried first to deny it, then to minimize it, then finally, with nowhere left to go, resigned in humiliation before the board could vote to remove him, which, Eleanor noted with grim satisfaction afterward, they absolutely would have done anyway, and unanimously. "You could have destroyed him publicly," Maya said to Daniel that evening, finding him in his study looking, for the first time in weeks, genuinely lighter. "The evidence would have supported it." "I thought about it," Daniel admitted. "Claire used to say that the way you handle your worst moments says more about you than the moments themselves." He glanced toward the stairs, toward his son's room, where the sound of Wesley's small, tentative laughter was drifting down for what felt like the first time in forever. "I didn't want my son's healing to become a headline. He's already been through enough without becoming a footnote in someone's corporate scandal." Maya felt something in her chest soften at that. Something she hadn't quite let herself acknowledge until that exact moment. That somewhere in the last 2 months of blocks, towers, bedtime stories, and quiet, patient floor-sitting, she had stopped simply doing her job and started genuinely caring about this family, all 3 generations of them. "You did good," she said softly. "We did," Daniel corrected, meeting her eyes in a way that made her breath catch slightly. "I couldn't have gotten here without you, Dr. Coleman. Any of it." We're almost at the ending now, but before we get there, I want to know, do you think justice was served fairly here, or should Daniel have gone public? Let me know below. 6 months later, the Ashworth estate sounded entirely different. Wesley talked constantly now, a small, delighted chatterbox who narrated his entire day in exhaustive detail, who had opinions about dinosaurs and lighthouse keepers and exactly which cereal was superior, and who ran through the halls again just like he used to, his laughter echoing off ceilings that, for the first time in 2 years, actually sounded like they belonged to a home rather than a museum. He still had hard days. Grief. Maya had taught the whole family gently and repeatedly, doesn't disappear on a schedule. It simply learns, eventually, to make room for joy alongside it. Some nights he still cried for his mother, and on those nights Daniel sat with him without trying to fix it, exactly the way Maya had once taught him, simply present, simply steady. Victoria visited every week now, no longer sharp-edged and defensive, but soft, present, and genuinely delighted every single time Wesley greeted her by name and ran to hug her at the door. She and Maya had become, somewhat improbably, close friends, the kind forged in shared crisis and mutual respect. Eleanor hosted Sunday dinners again, the whole family gathered around a table that had sat empty for far too long, and new photographs had finally begun appearing on the walls of that long, silent hallway. Wesley laughing on a swing set, and Daniel actually smiling, unguarded, for the first time in what Nathaniel quietly told Maya was longer than he could remember. As for Maya, her position had, somewhere along the way, stopped feeling like a job and started feeling like exactly where she belonged. Her visa concerns had long since resolved themselves, her student loans a distant, manageable memory, but none of that was really why she stayed. She stayed because one evening, months into her time there, Wesley had climbed into her lap during a thunderstorm, small and warm, and utterly unafraid, and whispered, "You're my lighthouse too, Miss Maya," and something in her chest had cracked open in the very best possible way. She stayed, too, because somewhere between block towers and boardroom battles, she had fallen for a man she once thought was made of nothing but cold marble, and had discovered underneath all of it was someone achingly, quietly human. Someone who, on a warm evening on the back terrace with Wesley finally asleep upstairs, took her hand carefully in his and said, "I don't know what he would have become without you." "I don't know what I would have become. You would have found your way," Maya said softly. "Eventually. Maybe," Daniel said, "but I'm glad I didn't have to find out." And that, right there, is the moment that always gets me. The quiet ones always do. If this story moved you even half as much as it moved me writing it, hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and tell me which part hit hardest for you. It genuinely means the world to hear from you. 46 caregivers walked through that house and saw a broken, impossible little boy who couldn't be reached. It took the 47th person to understand that he was never impossible at all. He was simply waiting, patiently and painfully, for someone willing to sit in his silence long enough to earn his trust. Sometimes the person who saves a family isn't the one with the most credentials on paper, or the most obvious qualifications, or the background everyone expects. Sometimes it's simply the person who refuses to give up when everyone else already has. Thank you so much for watching this story all the way to the end. If it touched you even a little, please consider liking this video, subscribing for more stories like it, and leaving a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. We read every single one, and it truly means so much to see how far these stories travel. This has been another story from Untold Maid Confessions. We'll see you in the next one.